Welcome to the Consulting Leaders Podcast, where we talk about the business of consulting. Whether you're looking to grow your practice or learn from the stories of leaders in consulting, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Guillaume Jouvencel, ex-PwC and co-founder of GHA Marketing. Join me as I interview the best consultants in their niche. Let's get on with the show. Sam, welcome to Consulting Leaders. Happy to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Let's jump straight into it. What pulled you into consulting, Sam, and process work?
So originally, I fell in love with process work in-house at like a water engineering company. And then as I went to pursue my MBA, I just became aware that process is such a broad space. It can be applied to lots of different industries, and that just sounded exciting. So really, it was mostly on a whim that I pursued consulting originally. But in process consulting specifically, the process space is very broad, very fascinating, and in a lot of ways, very new in the digital space. So it was a problem I fell in love with early in my consulting career around how do we bring good process logic and process engineering and process science into an increasingly digitized marketplace. It's been a new space and a very rewarding space. And I find myself still very in love with that problem in that space.
So, I love people falling in love with process work. Don't get me wrong. But can you tell us what's the challenge that you solve here? Like, what is it that you help people achieve?
So with process work specifically, now a lot of times people are looking for the technology solution or they're looking for the people solution. People are not as well able yet to articulate what does the pure process work or the process requirements need to look like to enable all those things that people want, all of the magic bullets, all the solutions. So we help clients with a lot of education. What is process work? What is process engineering? How does it impact your ability to succeed on these complex projects that everyone's looking for around artificial intelligence, around general software solutions? We want to revolutionize, but people don't even have their processes written down. They don't even know what they're looking at. They don't have their hands on the wheel. So the problem we predominantly help clients solve is, what does it mean to actually manage a process? Where are you in terms of your process management maturity? And how do the answer to those questions impact all of your goals and objectives around technology, around the future growth strategy, around scaling, and automation in general? So there's this process gap, and that's what we help with generally.
Okay. Who do you help specifically? Like, do you have a specific ICP, industry, company size? Who do you typically help, Sam?
So right now we are working exclusively with Fortune 1000 companies, Fortune 500 companies. So we're large enterprise. Are able with process skills to help from startup all the way to enterprise. But generally now we're helping the largest companies tackle some of the most complex automation and scaling problems, and especially artificial intelligence problems that they're tackling. As far as industry ICP, we don't have a particular industry. We tend to play better and provide more value in highly digitized service industries because that's where the most process maturity is lacking. And what I mean by that is e-commerce, digital, like retail companies in general. We do a lot of financial services, legal services, technology and technology products, agencies, creative work. We do a lot of marketing. Those spaces where there's not a lot of tangible or tactile footprint, they're struggling the most with needing better process engineering, better process mapping, better management of process data. So we tend to focus on those, but we're industry agnostic. We really can work across the market.
So, every consultant or owners, founders, managing partners of a consulting firm would want to work with, most of them, let's say, would want to work with Fortune 1000, Fortune 500 companies. How do you do that? How do you get the attention of those decision makers, of those people bringing you in those Fortune 500, 1000 companies? Like, how do you market, Sam?
Yeah, I'm not going to give an awesome marketing answer. The reality of the situation is throughout my career, when I was in industry and running process engineering for larger companies, I made connections earlier in my career that led to some early large client work. And our firm is a boutique firm. We're husband and wife run. We have about 10 people on staff right now, and we're largely growing by referral. And the reality is, once you work with one C-suite executive and you do a good job for a Fortune 500 company, it just is much easier to get referrals. And if they refer within that network in that space, we've been largely growing by that referral channel. So I'm not going to claim to be some marketing genius or somehow say that I'm able to break some magic wall that most small companies can't get through procurement for these large companies. It's just through the circumstances of my own career. And I would say having high integrity consulting work and good results and being able to leverage those networks effectively.
Okay, there are multiple things I want to double down on here. So first of all, integrity. It's funny, when I was working at PwC, my very first clients, my very first assignments, we would arrive into the group treasury office of the CFO, and on the wall was written, "Without integrity, nothing else matters. With integrity, nothing else matters." So I love that you would point that out directly. And the other thing that you mentioned, which I like a lot, is all ICPs, so the CEOs, people making decisions, right? Whoever you're dealing with to make a decision of hiring you as a consulting firm, they know other people like them. And most B2B coaching and consulting firms rely on referral, but I think it's important to remember that your clients know many other people like them, and they can introduce you to them. Do you have any specific ways that you get to CEOs to introduce you to other CEOs, or does it just happen naturally?
It's been happening organically and naturally for the most part. We will do maybe one time a year if we're thinking about expanding, or we have capacity, or we're looking to kind of try to diversify our client book. We will ask those strong relationships we have, "Hey, do you know anybody? Are you going to any conferences this year where you're doing fireside chats or roundtables with other C-suite executives? Is there any interfaces where we can actually have an intro brokered?" But that might be a once a year type of thing for us. Oftentimes when they have such a large purview, especially in larger enterprise companies, they will see other departments, or they will see other leaders within their vision that need this type of work. And more often they'll come to us and say, "Do you have capacity to help a colleague, help another department, help somebody from another firm that I just talked to at a conference, or within a mastermind group type of thing?" And that's typically how these things have been happening. So it hasn't been, and again, I think it's sort of a dogged pursuit of being visible, doing strong work, and you're just at the table, or at least we've been. And it hasn't been more of a conscious marketing effort versus say, we're informing big decisions, we're doing good work, and we just tend to be in the conversations.
I like that. How do you decide what mastermind to join, or to be part of, or to get your clients into? Can you tell us a bit more about this specific channel?
Sure. And like I said, I'll clarify, a lot of our clients, they're in those masterminds already. It's more like they're already, like the CEOs at large companies, they're already plugged into the conference circuits, they're in mentorship groups, or they're leading their own groups. Like they tend to be very actively involved in participating, especially in the large companies. So we're usually never advising, or I have no recommendations on, "Hey, you should join this mastermind to be in those spaces." It's more, high-powered executives tend to be in a lot of those spaces already. So they're kind of out there networking with other C-suite executives in their spaces and markets. So it's the irony, right, of the when you start to get, if you can get some good fortune and work with people at that level, they're extremely well connected by nature, and they have a lot of resources by the virtue of their position. And they tend to be the decision maker, and they move fast. So it's just, once you're in those pockets, I think it's this natural rhythm of, it's easier to get things moving and get things moving quickly.
So what you're referring to is something we like to call the domino effect, meaning nobody likes to be the first. But if you manage to get your first big enterprise, Fortune 500, 100, whatever company, and do a good job, obviously, then it's dominoes. It's like it lines up. I think obviously delivering an amazing work is important. Working your way up, you are in a case, Sam, where you got access to this through your previous jobs, and I don't think that's something a lot of consultants have the benefit of. So working your way up there is also totally fine if the goal is, of course, to get into those two spaces. But knowing where your ICP and the decision makers of your target accounts are hanging out is definitely a good strategy. Those masterminds might be expensive to access to, but they can be extremely worthwhile if you play it right.
For sure.
Tell me a bit more about how you move the sales conversation then, because I understand that there's going to be a referral, right? But you're still going to probably need to sit down with the potential clients, understand the needs, tie it to a solution that you have, make them go through a certain sales cycle, SOW, letter of engagement. Can you describe a little bit how you do that? Like what those sales motion look like for you?
Yeah, of course. So for our product, this has evolved a lot over the years too. So I want to clarify that generally the first part, I think, is having a very clear service offering with very clear boundaries and like well-articulated scope. So I think that's something I had to learn very much so over the years, that process work especially, but I would say consulting work in general, especially if you're doing strategic consulting advisory, if you're not like selling a particular product, you have to kind of know the bounds in which you're going to play and how do you price it and how do you, like, the more you go in knowing what you want to sell, I think it's easier to have a sales cycle. Because if you're just selling, hey, I'm a consultant, I'm a Swiss Army knife, and I do all these things, I think that's a lot more difficult for people to latch onto, especially with bigger companies. If you have to go through procurement, you have to have very specific contract terms and you have to have boundaries in what you're selling. So I think the biggest thing first is I had to articulate the product. And for us, we have a very clear fixed scope product up front, which is essentially a discovery phase. And I know a lot of consultancies have this, but for us, it's much more substantive because we do process mapping. That's sort of our key product that we have a mastery in. So we will take an operating model that could be several hundred people. And the first piece is always, we will map it from end to end. We'll map the operating model. We'll produce all the tactical maps of your operations. We give executives very strong visibility into what the work is actually happening in large organizations, because that's the most difficult thing. And then we have that fixed scope piece up front, and then we have a retained team offering. So as a process consultancy, we offer project management, process management, change management capability as a retained team. And that would be after a discovery phase. After you get that baseline, you move into, if you need a complex project done, we try to scope them 6 months to 12 months. We don't like to say, hey, this is going to be forever. So I think our sales cycle, I might be getting a little off the question, but it's really contingent on having very clear offerings and say you get a 1 to 3 month product up front, and it will flow into a retained relationship. And I think anyone who wants anything, the sales cycle is filtering them to whatever you want or whatever you think you're doing. You're going to start with this first, basically 3 month fixed scope. And that's made our sales process a lot more clear and a lot easier. So I'll pause there, and I'm happy to go into more detail, but that's sort of how we handle the sales cycle.
Sam, this is awesome. And this is why I love this show, is for exactly that, to be able to go down rabbit holes. So I love what you're saying. I talk to too many B2B coaches and consultants who have a legitimate business and who are like making legitimate money, but who still are like not crystal clear on their ICP, right? Because I couldn't agree more with the offer, but it's like, oh yeah, I can service anybody. But when you try to address your offer to everyone, you really address it to no one, because nobody can be like, oh yeah, that's me. So crystal clarity on the ICP. And then, of course, crystal clarity on the offer and like how you actually bring value to them. By the way, benefits, not feature. Like, of course, at the level we're dealing with, the level you're dealing at, the CEOs, the chief process officers, whatever, they will want to know the nitty-gritty of what's going to happen, sequential order, RACI, like roles and responsibilities, of course. But the idea is when you're in the sales cycle, what you want to highlight is the benefits of implementing a solution like that. The cost of not doing anything is usually going to play a big role. But this can only happen if you're crystal clear on ICP, offer, and then embodying that into the sales cycle. So maybe that's my follow-up question to you. That being said, how do you make it live? And what's your tactical advice to implement this into the sales cycle?
And you're talking about implementing the idea of knowing your ICP, ROI, like the
ICP
mechanics you were just
offer,
articulating? Yeah.
yeah, 3-month projects. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah. So for us, how we integrate that is we do, like you asked earlier, and our ICP is fairly broad, but the ICP for the type of clients we're doing, a lot of times is executives, and it's become very much more clear over the years. For us, it was a long journey to get here, but there's so much executive movement in large companies, and oftentimes you can lose the first 6 months as an executive if you inherit, let's say, a 500-person team, and you're not able to interview everybody on the ground. It's very hard to absorb exactly the operating context so that you can be informed to make good leadership decisions. So a lot of times the sale starts inherently in that space, which is we know generally the executive profile that we're trying to sell. And when you talk about ROI, you have the cost of us doing the work, you have the result of what the work will provide. And then the very clear like alternative is you do nothing and you absorb by osmosis, or you learn by just shadowing or taking whatever poor or non-existent documentation existed in your predecessor's organization and trying to just do this yourself as best you can on the side of your desk. So, I think we don't use those terms, but the logic you just defined of who are we talking to, how much is what we're selling at a cost, and what the alternative is, the pain is clearly there, and the narrative resonates with our ICP, at least around this is a very fixed offering that will likely lead to you wanting to have additional work support, like based off the back of the recommendations. And we're open with that up front. It's like, we'll give you this. It will be a fixed scope. It'll be easier to get through procurement and kind of get something signed. It will be standalone. But if you want us to stay on, we will be available for that. And we just kind of keep everything very transparent. But I think we integrate it in just very common sense conversation, especially with our market right now. But I think the foundation principles that you're articulating, we do use them intuitively in our sales conversations. And it kind of plays roughly like how I just articulated it.
I love that. Let me ask you this, maybe a bit upstream, for those B2B coaches and consultants who don't have their ICP and offer nailed properly. How would you recommend them to go about that so that they can implement the advice you just gave in terms of sales?
Yeah, I'm only hesitating because it took me a lot of years. I'm not going to say it was an easy process for me. So I feel a little bit shaky offering advice, but I would say the biggest thing is listening to the advisement that you're giving and knowing it's something you can't avoid forever. Sometimes I think when you're in the early stages of creating your own consulting brand, you do the work. I always advise people do the work that's you can get. Like, obviously you want to have some pricing boundaries, you want to protect yourself, but I mean, do more than think. Like, wherever the opportunities are, wherever your network is yielding, find the work that you can find, but then be very conscious about analyzing the client interaction. Are they resonating with the offering? What value you're providing? Are you succeeding in the engagement? It was really through doing many years of engagements that I was able to get to the point where I could even start to articulate what exactly am I trying to sell and to who? Because if I had started at the beginning before I'd done the work and tried to do that, it would have been very difficult. So I think my advice to some extent is be iterative. Like, it's something you need, but it's also something you need to discover through learned experience. That would probably be at least relating to my own journey on this topic.
I love this, and I'm going to double down and give a bit of my 2 cents and personal experience as well, just because I think it could be useful for the audience. And Sam, I love what you just said. And by the way, it took us 2.5 years to figure that out as well. So it's not an overnight process. But hopefully this will help you listening, accelerate that process. When you start, and not even necessarily when you start, because as a consultant, you often fall into this by accident because you are doing a job at a company, you leave it, and they still pay you as a consultant much more money. That's how a lot of consultants get into this. And they're like, that's not too bad of a life. That said, when you're a consultant, B2B coach, making good money when you begin, you will often still take anybody with a pulse and a credit card, and the pulse is optional. And I think going through that cycle that you just mentioned, Sam, of like understanding who you're servicing best, and like try to double down on them is key. And it can be scary because you're like, okay, I'm basically going to rule out 90% of the markets, 99% even, to focus on one specific avatar, ICP. Tactically, the way that we did that is we looked at the about 120 clients that we had served, and we're like, okay, who are the 10% that we got the best results for? And not in like, oh yeah, I delivered well, or like I was vibing with the clients. What are the clients who got the best results, like tangible, qualitative and quantitative? And what do these 10% clients have in common that we can say, okay, this is the people that we are going to help only now? I think that already kinds of help focusing on one specific ICP with the offer that got in there. Plus, you usually have strong proof that you can deliver on that specific service. But it takes time. Another component of consulting, Sam, is retention. How do you retain? How do you make sure that once you've signed one of those Fortune 1000, Fortune 500 company, you transform it into another engagement and into another engagement, and you look at another process that you can improve? How do you do that?
Yeah. This is where my answer is probably a bit counterintuitive. We talk about
Love that.
integrity in the beginning of the show, and integrity to me in consulting is actually the opposite of not focusing on retention, which is focusing on capability building, empowering clients to not need you, and making very clear lines of finishing work and pushing to finish it on time, and then releasing yourself from the relationship if there's no longer value to play. And part of that plays through in our offering, which in addition to consulting engagements, we offer a lot of training, and we try to make sure that if we're going to be in a team, they can also learn what we do so they don't need us. And in some ways it's not a great, there is no retained consulting strategy, because I find that if you're focused on retention in the consulting world, especially with high ticket strategic engagements, you can't also balance doing an incredible job and leaving the client better off than they started, because there's a conflict there, right? Of how do I remain here all the time? But then that means you would make them rely on your capability, which I feel like is inherently a conflict in the consulting world. So I would say we don't really focus on retention as a strategy because of that. We focus on doing very clear scopes and trying to get ourselves out of situations. And generally, I think that leads to better outcomes. And if clients, especially in big organizations, have infinite work, that tends to lead to natural retention, but we don't focus on retention as a strategy. If anything, we focus on getting in and out as quickly as possible as a strategy.
Firing yourself as fast as possible.
I think that's the heart of automation and process work too. So in some ways, our space, we have to live what we preach, right? We help clients with automation and trying to increase capability and standardization to create a process where they would need to rely on a consultant to do that, I feel like is against our mission. So in some ways, that's our stance on it. I think it's been successful so far and we feel good about it, but it does mean we don't rely on like very, very long relationships unless the work just naturally carries itself forward.
I mean, I'm only going to ask you this, Sam, because I feel you've thought about this and kind of nailed the ICP offer marketing sales process. Obviously, there is a gold rush right now to service companies with all things AI and automation. Like that's the new model. That's the thing a lot of people are after. Most people don't go after the Fortune 1000 companies because they wouldn't know where to start or even how to do this. So they target SMBs, which in a sense makes sense, and that's easy to start. And that has been on the table for us as well, since we are a marketing agency. Like, okay, should we follow the hype? We haven't. Maybe that will be our own doom. Let's see. But so I think when you automate as an agency, right, you want to have one big project that allows you to get the cash collected up front and like kind of things going on. But then you want to try to have some ways to retain or keep on billing the clients at a much lower package, right? Because the big chunk of it, my God, the big chunk of work has been done and delivered. But the way I see it in automation is like, yeah, for sure, there is like the whole system and infrastructure to change, but then there's probably going to be maintenance of that automation to be made, some updates from time to time, maybe even, I don't know, owning the software that you introduce into those companies. Have you thought about that a bit? Like how to keep, project is, I don't know, I'm just going to give relative numbers, but like project is 100, but then the baseline to keep the flow going is 2 each and every month or something like this. Have you thought about that? That's maybe a bit of a messed up question.
No, for sure. I mean, we haven't thought about it, but I think it's in our unique situation, there's a mismatch between being like a 10-person shop and servicing the Fortune 500, let's say. So like, we're not in a position where we're going project to project. we would never be in a position to offer any ongoing software maintenance or software costs, like software stuff to like such large companies, because I mean, we would be orders of magnitude smaller than a vendor that could service those offerings. So we're highly projectized. In some ways, like the heart of your question too is, if you successfully implement a project, can you leave behind an operating function within the client space to kind of make sure that project has controls, or like it's being adopted or reinforced or doing its thing correctly? We haven't thought about it as much from our position in the market, but what we have done, and I mentioned it, is the learning and the capability building. So like if we have a successful project with a client, what we try to do is that offering you're talking about, it's not exactly what you're referring to, but I think, hey, did you have a successful engagement with us? Can we teach your people so that you have this capability in-house? And that could be through training programs, virtual seminars. So like we want their people to engage with our learning and education products. And in that sense, we're trying to scale that part of the business. And that's sort of that model a little bit, which is, we've done this, we can show you the power of this. Your own people can do this. Now engage with us in what becomes a more passive engagement for us, which is join our classes, engage with our e-learning content. Like that's sort of the model we'd like to embody, versus, hey, we're embedding some sort of hypercare or maintenance or, a piece of product that's actually part of your operating model. It's more, how do we show you what good looks like on setting up complex changes? And then do you want to buy from us for continuing education, continuing capability building? We're leaning more that way. We're at the early stage of that journey, so that might end up being a complete flop, just to be clear with everybody. But that's more how we're envisioning that model, for us at least.
And what I love about that is that, back to what you were saying earlier around iterating, testing, and trying to keep on improving the offer as you go. You embody that. So I like it. Let me throw a little bit of a curveball at you, Sam, because you've been flying through this interview. What's your number one challenge? What's the one nut that you're trying to crack that, once you crack, you're going to take the whole thing to the next level? What would that be for you?
Yep. My number one challenge is scaling me out of client engagements.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of our consulting is new. It's highly technical. And to a certain extent, it's relied historically on me as the principal consultant, running in engagements, being in the meetings, executing the work. As we scale our team, the biggest challenge is automating that piece of myself. Now, luckily, I'm an expert in automation and process design, so I'm up for the challenge. But if we could crack that and I don't have to be in the field consulting as much, then I think to your question, we could really go to the next level in increasing our academic footprint, increasing some of our more progressive products around capability building in this space. And really, I'd like to get back to academics and doing software creation. And there's lots of ideas, but unless I can get myself out of client work, it's going to be hard to really drive that vision. So that's our number one challenge. And I'd say we're working on it, but we'll see. Like, can you go from a consultancy that's successful when you're the leader of the brand to moving it down to other people, especially in high ticket consulting? I think that's a challenge that the whole market faces. So if I can crack that, I'll let you know how it goes.
And it will probably be worth an encore episode where you would come and tell us how you did that. Sam Drauschak, ladies and gentlemen. Sam, if people want to find out more about you, see what you do, where should they go?
They should go to, honestly, if they want to learn about me, if you just type in my name, I'm the only Sam Drauschak, so you'll see tons of stuff if you just type my name into Google. Otherwise, you can find me at Cavi Consulting, CAVI consulting.com. And as I think I mentioned, we're doing these learning products. We're also hosting a 6-month seminar on process leadership in the spring virtually. So if anyone's interested in that, that's a big thing you can check out on our site right now. But that's it. Find me on LinkedIn and wherever you see anything on Cavi Consulting.
We'll put all the links in the description. I can say one thing for sure is that you've gained at least one new connection on LinkedIn out of this interview, Sam. Me. I just added you. Sam, thank you so much for coming on Consulting Leaders.
Thanks for having me. It was a wonderful conversation.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Leaders Podcast. We hope you learned valuable lessons on how to grow your practice and take your business to the next level. Make sure to subscribe and leave us a review wherever you're listening to this show so you never miss an episode. To apply and be a guest on the show, click the link in the description. See you next time. How